Yeah.
So it's going to be weird, and I'm going to worry about, like, if I say something like, oh, this guy's so great, and then by the time this comes out, it turns out, like, oh, he just murdered a busload of children and ate them all.
Watch out.
Or and then if I say, oh, this guy gave a bad performance in this, and then he just died after saving a busload of children from a cannibal. Yeah. So it's tricky.
It is tricky.
Oh, that can be our intro. We're recording this early.
Yeah.
Because we have to, for reasons that we'll talk about. Hey, you know what? It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it.
We have lives.
Yeah. So we're recording this very early, a month early.
It's not Christmas yet in this time.
You know what? Deal with it.
Yeah.
And now that I said deal with it, that must mean we are ready for another episode of I Love This, You Should Too. I am your co-host, Indy. Deal with it, Randhawa. And with me is Samantha, busload of school children, Randhawa.
Oh, okay. Hi.
But you could be the one who ate them. You could be the one who saved them. Who knows?
I could be one of the children.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, so many angles.
What are we going to do today, Sam?
This is one of our shorter episodes where Indy and I will both have a spoiler-free thing of the fortnight. And then Indy will reveal what our big watch for next week is.
Oh, yeah, it's my turn to... I almost forgot.
Is.
I'm ready, though. Don't worry.
Okay, good. So, Indy, do you want to start us off with your thing or things of the fortnight?
Yes. My thing of the fortnight is the horror fiction of Paul Tremblay. So if you listen to this and you hear me talk about books, I don't read a lot of contemporary stuff. I tend to read a lot of older things by people who are no longer living. But at Halloween, I thought, like, you know what, I'm going to read something spooky. And I've read a lot of classic horror, so let's do something more contemporary. And I read one of Tremblay's novels and really enjoyed it. So I thought, you know what, I'll just read all of them. So I read all of his books. He's done some detective-y type ones too, but I won't talk about those. We're going to do a quick run-through about his horror novels.
Okay.
So he writes horror, or like sometimes it's called weird fiction now, because it's not horror strictly in a lot of ways. I don't know. I don't read many books that are just straight up horror books.
Yeah.
There's not too many of them out there. It's thriller, it's weird, it's unusual, whatever you want to call it. But I liked them quite a bit. So the first and maybe best, I think, is his 2015 novel, A Head Full of Ghosts, which won the 2015 Bram Stoker Award. And this is about a family in Massachusetts, and they are under financial and emotional strain because their daughter might be possessed.
Dun, dun, dun.
And this deals with a lot of unreliable narrator and how unreliable your memory is. That's always a fun part of it. And it does get into the, is this mental illness or is this supernatural possession? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the end, because all of Tremblay's novels seem to have that kind of ambiguity of what is truly supernatural. And it's done differently in each one. And if I talk about it in each one, it would kind of give things away. So I'll just talk about how he tackles that, which I think is one of his greatest strengths towards the end of all of this. It also gets into the media exploitation of things, because this girl who is possessed or mentally ill, whatever it is, they go on and create like a reality documentary show around her.
Oh.
Because the family needs money and they need help, and it's exploitative at times, and it talks about that. It talks about faith versus skepticism, and a lot of it is about family dynamics and the role that trauma plays in that. And a lot of his books, especially this one, are really about the nature and the power of storytelling, because there's two sisters in this that are always telling these stories to each other and how they go on to shape their realities. And the idea of us reading a story, questioning what the reality of that story is kind of like doubled up by those themes as well. So I think that one is a great place to start. So go check out Head Full of Ghosts.
So many ghosts in that head.
Then in 2016, he released a novel called Disappearance at Devil's Rock, which might be my second favorite of his. So maybe I like them a little less each time they go. But I also read them in order, so maybe I was just getting used to his sort of thing. But Disappearance at Devil's Rock was an interesting one because during my reading of it, it's not that I didn't like it. I didn't like it nearly as much as the others. Mm-hmm. And then when I was done, it sat with me and I was like, oh man, okay, yeah, that was better than I was giving it credit for. This is a novel about a missing child. A 13-year-old boy goes missing, and it's mostly following the mother and the family trying to figure out what happened. So there's a little bit of police procedural drama to it, but it's rooted in the story about grief and loss. That's really the basis of the movie. But we do also get some things about, again, the blurred line between reality and supernatural. There's a lot about guilt and responsibility between both friends who felt they should have done something to prevent this, and the mother especially. And there's some really interesting ideas about, it gets into the storytelling stuff too, but about secrets and the lies we tell others and the lies we tell ourselves, and how that starts to become very, very powerful. And a lot of it's about the fragility of memory as well, because you tell yourself a lie enough, you're going to start to believe that lie. And this book, again, I'm not going to give anything away, but where it goes, whether you like it or not, I know a lot of people hate this book because of where it went. If nothing else, you won't see where it's going. And it's not just like, look at this, a twist of the exact opposite thing of what you'd expect, but it just goes to places where you wouldn't imagine a story that starts this way would go. And it was refreshing in that way, at least.
I love a twist.
Yeah, and I don't even think that you could say these books have twists, because I think we think of a twist in a book or a movie in like the M. Night Shyamalan way of one thing changes and you're like, oh, wow, that was it?
Yeah.
This is more of a, we're going one way, and then when the reality is more revealed, you're like, oh, it's that instead. I don't know how I feel about that. Is that much better? Is that much worse? And then there's still elements of the first thing we were thinking. So it's not something I see a lot, and I appreciate that. He wrote The Cabin at the End of the World in 2018, and this was turned into that movie Knock at the Cabin or Knock at the Cabin Door, an M. Night Shyamalan movie.
Yeah.
The movie was fine. The book was good as well. I liked it. It's about a couple and their adopted child. It's a home invasion story at its heart, I guess. People come to their cabin door and they give them a proposition that, of course, is going to make them question reality and what they are able to do. And this is another one. There's a lot of elements of faith versus doubt now that I'm talking about all of these together. And this one is about, there's, again, the lasting effects of trauma and that being resurfacing and kind of always being a part of you after you go through something like that. There's a lot about the nature of family and love and acceptance, the fear of the outsider. What's out there is different than us, and some of the people maybe who are on the inside are outsiders in their own way, and how that develops them. And it's also an apocalypse story too.
Oh, so many things.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing about his novels that I like so much is you'll have these supernatural things. The first one's a possession. The second one's a missing person. This one's the apocalypse. But that's not the most important thing. That's the most important thing of the plot. But when I think about the book, that's not my big takeaway about it. It's always about the characters and some themes that the author's trying to work through by using these supernatural elements. He released a book of short stories in 2019 called Growing Things and Other Stories. And this one was kind of fun because it gets a little meta-textual because there's references to these other novels. And then there's one that's a series of notes from dog walkers left for the family they're walking the dog of.
Oh, okay.
That was a sentence. And they become increasingly more insane. Like one of the dog walkers is having a bit of an existential crisis. One of them is turning into a stalker and is harassing the other dog walker so they could have this job and getting involved in this person's life. And then the person that they're leaving the notes for becomes clear is the author, because this person is saying like, oh, I read this book of yours. It was kind of shitty, but here's what you should do. And starts giving the author ideas for short stories, which then are also in this book of short stories. And the characters from some of those novels come back. One of them is a storyteller in their novel, so they're doing another story in this. And that whole idea of the ambiguous nature of the supernatural elements, this short story work through other characters makes fun of that, because they're saying like, oh, you're just not going to tell us and you think that's clever, huh? It's not. And so the critics kind of the author are in this book too, it was fun. I liked it quite a bit. Maybe my least favorite was his 2020 novel Survivor Song. What's interesting about it, I think it takes place over maybe like 3 hours.
Oh,
this novel.
That's fast.
Yeah. So it's going to take you whatever 15, 20 hours to read it, but it's 2 hours worth of stuff. And it is an apocalyptic novel itself, and it's kind of a zombie apocalypse, but in this world, it's an advanced mutated form of rabies that's going around.
Oh.
So you get bitten, you're going to act rabid, which is not so different from how zombies are in movies.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. And I didn't realize this. I assumed this was written after COVID, because in the right away thing, people are getting bitten. So then everyone's like, you know what? The government's doing this. Oh, you want to vaccinate me? Not on my watch. But this was actually written before.
Oh.
It came out in 2020, but he wrote it in like 2018, 2019. And he said after, if I had lived through COVID already, I would have made all of these things more extreme, because I thought I was writing this horror novel of this doctor goes out and is trying to find help for her patient, but she is foreign. And everyone's like, oh, you're part of the foreign, some sort of force that's here to get all of us Americans. And there's like militias forming in the street and she's like, no, I'm a medical professional. Why won't anyone listen to me?
Yeah.
And no one does. They don't trust the vaccines. And it was done before COVID. And he kind of underplayed it, because the reality of what we went through, people acted more crazy than the people of this horror novel.
Which is not great.
No, it's not. But it was interesting for those reasons. And then in 2022, he wrote The Pallbearers Club. And this one, the most interesting thing, I think, is, well, there's two things. It could be a vampire story in a way, but we think of a vampire as someone who drinks your blood and can live forever. But what if the vampire is less direct? Like maybe this vampire is living forever, but everyone whose lives they go into becomes sick and you get injured more often. You're kind of unlucky more often, and it kind of drains your health and your spirit just by being near you. And it's reimagining that way. But then it's also interesting in this is a novel written by a fictitious character saying, this is my true memoir. And they've left the memoir for someone to read after their death. So we presume that they're dead. But then the person who's reading it is going through and making notes of like, well, that's not true. You're just lying here.
Oh.
So it's a fictitious memoir, which is then being commented upon.
Oh.
So that part was really interesting. And it's, again, with that unreliable memory, but also whether or not things are supernatural or just unfortunate. Mm-hmm. Like, am I unlucky because you're a spiritual vampire? Or you know what? Maybe that's just me. Maybe I just have scoliosis. That's also a thing that happens. And the friendship and how our identities grow throughout time is interesting in this. And then they talk a lot about, well, they don't talk about it, but it's about the horrors of the everyday, like how mundane your life can be. And that can be the greatest horror.
Huh.
So that was cool. The Beast You Are is his short story book that came out in 2023. I have not read that one yet because I didn't know it existed until when I was just making these notes for this right now. So I was like, oh, I missed one. But just this year, he did release a movie called Horror Movie. And Horror Movie was fun because he's, again, playing with format a bit, because the premise of that movie is there are people who were making a movie. Terrible things happened on the set of that movie, so it was never released. And the script is then in the movie too. So when the script's in there, we presume characters also acted that out, and then we'll get a more like novel style of the actors after they had just performed whatever scene that was. that kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, there's a script mashed into this novel. So that's a lot of fun. And then the script and the legend of this movie grow, and it's playing with those same ideas of memory changing as the script kind of gets revised and is being rebooted. So there's like a mirror of how our memory can change versus how we now consume media, which we do have these like childhood memories. This was my movie, and now it's being remade and things are different, and that plays into it too. But then again, we get into the really supernatural stuff of like, was this truly a cursed movie, or did bad things just happen? But in all of his books, one of the big things I think a lot of people take away is that what is supernatural and what is not. Because a lot of people in movies too, you want to know like, well, what was real? And oftentimes when we talk about one of those more ambiguous movies, I say like, well, it doesn't matter because the same things happened regardless of if it was a ghost or a mental illness. Right. So sometimes it doesn't matter in that way. And in his, it's never really about the open-endedness. There is like some ambiguity at times, but I always felt satisfied at the end. I never felt like, wait, so what happened? I felt I knew enough, even though sometimes I didn't know everything. And he doesn't really do the, none of this was real. And then everything's explained in a clever way of like, oh, you thought that was a ghost, but actually it was the air conditioning and all of these little things. I don't like when books and movies do that. That feels a little too cutesy.
Yeah, I could see that.
And also it's just kind of not the point of these. I said I didn't want to talk about it by each novel because that would give things away. But overall, you can talk about it because you don't know which novel I'm referring to. Because the answers to the question of was this supernatural or was this something else range from like, oh, there wasn't a ghost there. It just turns out some people are really, really terrible. And the things we would usually think is a demonic possession, that might just be a bad, bad person. Sometimes people are dicks. But then maybe that doesn't explain everything because it's not everything was fake or everything was supernatural. Why can't it be a combination somewhere in the middle too? And sometimes it's the supernatural thing does in fact exist, but not in the way you'd expect. And sometimes you don't really know, and it doesn't really matter because the reason why doesn't change what happened. And sometimes the ambiguity depends less on what is supernatural and more on what of what I am reading is the truth. Because there are narrators who just lie sometimes, and they're called out on it sometimes not so much. But in the end, it's always more about the thematic stuff or the character stuff that then gets heightened because of the supernatural, or at least the presumed supernatural elements of it. So his books tend to be less about what is supernatural, and this is a horror book about the supernatural, and more about this is a book about this character or about this theme, and the best way to heighten that is through supernatural elements.
Okay.
So all of his books, I feel like you get something about the characters or what the author is trying to say, and less of like, oh, this was a spooky ghost story. It happens to also be a spooky ghost story.
Right. Okay.
So I like his work, and this is one of the few times where I was reading something that I think you might actually like.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like the type of book that I like to read.
Yeah, I was thinking that reading it, and also reading all of these, I was thinking, I get why people read contemporary fiction. It goes down real smooth. It's nice. I like it.
Yeah, when you started listening to it or reading it, you were like, I get it. These are like so easy to get through, and there's not like a lot of complex thinking that has to go into it. It's not a hard read, and I'm like, yeah.
They're page turners, and it's been a long time since I read a book where you're reading to find out what happens next, and that's the most exciting part of it. Mm-hmm. Because like my favorite novels are Jude the Obscure and Kafka on the Shore, and they're sometimes arduous to get through, but I love that about them. But I really see the appeal of just like, ooh, what happens next? Is it a spooky ghost? I don't know. That's fun too.
Yeah.
So go check out the works of Paul Tremblay. My favorite is probably A Head Full of Ghosts, but I also really enjoyed Disappearance at Devil's Rock. But they're all pretty good, so go read them.
Nice.
And Samantha, do you have a book for us too on this very literary episode?
I do. So my thing of the fortnight kind of comes with a little bit of a history lesson because I started listening to this book and realized that I didn't know enough and it's not that you need to know about it, but it like kind of helped my enjoyment of this book. So do you know what was happening in Virginia in 1609?
1609?
It's kind of a random question, but
That's not like Roanoke times, is it?
it's around there, kind of. So this book is about the protagonist named Ellis, and she is an indentured servant who travels from England to Jamesport or Jamestown. And in 1609, there is a 7-year drought going on. There's the beginning of the First Anglo-Powhatan War, and also a hurricane has destroyed multiple ships that had supplies for the settlers. So there was like
a bunch of the town of Jamestown was like wiped out in
yes.
this time. Yeah, okay.
So in the winter between 1609 and 1610, they called it the starving time. There were 500 settlers at the beginning of the winter. There were 61 left at the end of the winter.
Woo.
So like
winter.
A lot of people died. So this book is about Alice, and as she is working as an indentured servant in order to have come to the new world for a better life. And you also see her taking care of someone who is very, very ill while pregnant. And then you also see her searching for her father, who went off to build a house elsewhere. And you see her meeting kind of the other people around her age in the town. And then also you see her kind of mental health take a downward spiral as everyone stops having any food to eat and things get real grisly and bad in the fort. So you get this like really interesting kind of feel of like, is this real or is this like all in your head?
Oh,
kind of
well, you know how I'm into that.
Yeah. So, like, is this her daydreaming or hallucinating, or is this actually happening? And so you get this really interesting kind of like dreamlike feeling in some parts of the book because she's starving and she's trying to keep this pregnant woman alive, her employer's wife. And also you get kind of a look at what the men of this fort were doing and kind of the personalities and what would have happened in this actual historical time. And the author uses some people, some of the characters in this book, not Ellis, but a couple other characters who were actually real people who lived in James Fort, and their remains were found. And it really interesting afterword in this book by the author, who talks about some of these like real people and how historians have been able to tell kind of what rank they were at and what like they would have been doing and how they would have died at the fort during this winter. And one of the things I kind of found interesting for that was one of the characters died, and they look at, I guess, the kind of plates that they were eating off of were full of lead. Mm-hmm. So, and those were the fancy people plates. And so the servants and stuff weren't eating off of these plates and thus didn't have a lot of like lead in their teeth and in their bones and stuff. Whereas all the fancy people, so you could tell what rank people were at based on what plate they would have been eating off of. And all the fancy people had a lot of lead poisoning. So it was really interesting because you get like kind of a historical view of who all these people were and what also might have caused a lot of the aggression and the like slow demise of this group of people. Just lead poisoning.
Yeah.
There probably would have been, I can't remember what it would have been, but like the grain mold, ergot poisoning. And so you kind of get an idea of like what might have also been happening.
Okay, so this is kind of maybe using some fiction or some
it's like a historical fiction
to fill in the gaps of what people think happened at this time when all those people died.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I found it really interesting because I find this time really interesting, and I think it's a fun book for just the story because it's a really well written story. But I also found it really interesting because I was also kind of researching on the side learning a little bit more about this time period. So it is called To the Bone by Alena Bruzas. And this is actually one of the books that you brought me an advanced reader copy of.
Oh, yeah, I got from my work. Sometimes I get advanced copies of novels.
Yeah, so I had taken a picture of it and it came up in my holds and I was like, oh yeah, I'll listen to that now. And it was really good. So I recommend it if you enjoy like a historical fiction.
That sounds very interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, that's To the Bone. And Indy, do you have a movie for us for next week?
I have two.
Woo!
So in the past, especially the first two seasons, I really had like a plan. You needed the base knowledge of certain movies to be able to fully appreciate other ones. You needed some things that were kind of going to open the gateway to maybe something that is less accessible. Mm-hmm. So if you start watching some black and white and subtitled stuff, then the kind of weirder ones would go down a little easier. I was thinking, so I was planning all sorts of things out. Right now, no plan. I have a list of movies that I thought we could talk about at some point. And I was just picked two. And I said, you know what? These are good movies. I don't remember them well. I would love to rewatch them. This is a good reason. So I am going to give you the option.
Okay.
You can watch an older movie in English or a newer movie that is not in English. What would you prefer?
I'm going to go new.
And foreign.
Yeah. Is that a good choice? Did I choose right?
In that case, we are going to watch the 2002, I guess that's not new, but my other movie was from the 60s.
Okay, yeah, then that's new.
The 2002 film in English called Hero. Hero is a wuxia film, a martial arts film. And at this time, there were some very successful crossover movies because we were getting into that wire fu, kind of these beautiful fight scenes. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was very big. House of Flying Daggers. And this movie was co-written and directed by Zhang Yimou. And Zhang Yimou has done some great and very famous movies himself. Curse of the Golden Flower and House of Flying Daggers were some of his later bigger ones, but Raise the Red Lantern and Judo are just very well respected, very good movies. And he also got a lot of acclaim for the closing ceremonies at the Beijing Olympics.
Oh, okay.
He did that. And when you see his movies, you're like, yeah, I see why you'd get this guy to do your closing ceremonies, because he makes some visually stunning movies. And in my recollection from 20 years ago, Hero is definitely one of those. So I haven't seen it in a long time. And this is some historical fiction as well. It stars Jet Li. Do you know him at all?
I know of him.
He's someone that crossed over into Hollywood and was doing movies with like DMX sometimes.
Yeah.
Romeo Must Die. But he was of our lifetime. I think it's Jet Li and Jackie Chan are the two biggest martial arts stars.
Yes.
And Jackie Chan, of course, has that comedy element. And man, I love Jackie Chan. I love Jet Li as well. It also stars Tony Leung, my maybe favorite actor ever.
Yes.
We've done two of his movies this season in the Mood for Love and 2046. It also stars Maggie Cheung, who we have talked about, and Zhang Ziyi, who is one of my favorites, who was also in 2046.
Yeah, this is your great lineup.
And the cinematography was done by Christopher Doyle, who is maybe my favorite living directors of photography. He did most of Wong Kar-wai's movies. And just, if you see a beautiful, beautiful movie coming out of Hong Kong, chances are Christopher Doyle did it. This is not a Hong Kong movie. It is about the Warring States period in ancient China, when China was divided into 7 states. It takes place in about 220 something BC. And it's about the kind of the creation of China. And this movie was released in 2002 in China and didn't get a release until 2004 in the US, and did quite well. Like it made a lot of money. It was nominated for Best Foreign Language Picture or whatever that is, Best Foreign Movie, something like that.
Yeah.
That one. It was the first Chinese language movie to top the American box office, despite taking so long to ever be released here, because they're like, well, I'm not going to read during a movie, but then people read during a movie. We are going to watch it. There are a couple of slightly different versions, but you'll gain, I think, a maximum of like 8 minutes or so. So I'm not sure. I think we have the longer cut.
Okay.
But if you have the theatrical cut, you're not losing that much. And hopefully after watching it, I'll have some information on it. But what are your thoughts or expectations? Because you haven't seen, I'm going to say, any martial arts movies.
Yeah. I assume it's going to be fun and like fast.
Okay. I'm not going to correct you, but I
don't
think...
even really know. Like, I don't have like a full thought on what it's going to be, but I'm sure it will be great.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I don't know. Is that wrong?
Well, I think it's great. I don't know that you will think that.
Okay.
If you do not watch a lot of martial arts movies, I say approach it like you would a musical.
Okay.
So if you're watching a musical and anytime someone sings, you're like, well, why are they singing now?
Yeah.
They should just talk it out. Like, you can't, why, just everyone can dance like that? That doesn't seem right.
Suspend your belief.
Yeah, it takes a certain amount of suspension of disbelief. But in this one, it's more about, that's not how people move. You can't actually fight like that.
Right.
But is it beautiful? Does it tell you something about the character, the way they move? It's doing the same work as a song would through the fight sequences.
Okay.
So that's my suggestion. This is also not a terribly long movie for something that is a historical Chinese epic. Now, there's a lot of historical Chinese epics that have topped their box office in the last 20 years. And they are all like 4-hour movies.
Oh.
This one is something like 100 minutes. So
okay.
It'll go through hopefully quite quickly. Visually, I think it is beautiful. And the story, I think, is going to be one of those kind of like inspirational, I'm not exactly like a feel-good sports movie type, but something along those lines a little bit. But directed at an entire culture.
Okay.
So go check out Zhang Yimou's Hero from 2002. It's either 2 hours long or 1 hour 45, somewhere right around there. And come back and listen to us chat all about it next week.
Perfect. Okay, well, we will see you next week when we see... What's the movie called?
Hero.
I was going to say Harry for some reason.
But check out Harry. Zhang Yimou's classic about the Warring States period in China. Harry. Hero.
And we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
I don't know why I had Harry stuck in my head, but I did.